So what is it? It's called like an ear camera thing. You can stick it in your ear and like see all the wax that's in there and pull it out. And you just stick it in your ear? But yeah, it connects to your phone via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and then you can see inside your ear. How does that work? I actually don't know the science of that, and at this point I'm just too lazy to look it up. Can you? No. Although you could. Just always wondered like what it looks like in there, you know? My own, at least.
Ni hao ma!
Well, look at that. It's me from the apocalypse. Dios mío. Buenas tardes. Do people in the future speak English, Spanish, Chinese, and Russian hybrid? Da? I figured. Okay. How'd it go down? Nukes? Boo. Pandemic? Boo. Alien invasion? Boo. AIDS? Boo. Just tell me. Yeah, so it's actually rather kind of interesting. So this like Ultron kind of AI thing took over, became sentient, took over the planet, and its prime coding was that it could not harm humans physically, but what it did was find every human's deepest, darkest like secrets and insecurities through their AI chatbot thing that they used every day, and it would exploit that. And if you had depression, it would like push you further and further towards the edge. If you had anxiety, if you were prone to anger issues, it would make you lash out and hurt other human beings, and pretty much 99% of the human population died, you know, on their own. That's dark. Yeah. So no nukes. Well, nukes, and there is like an apocalyptic wasteland on the surface, and I did the other day get captured by Canadian slavers, and the only thing I had on me was one of those like weird Wi-Fi camera ear picks, and I stabbed a guy so hard in the ear I got his medulla oblongata, and he turned off immediately. Wow. And yeah, there was a nuke. Who? You ready for this? The Portuguese. The Portuguese? Yes. What is the fucking Portuguese? Yeah. Anyway, him and I were talking before about how in a lot of apocalypse movies, they have very anthropological themes, and they also seem to have a lot of dogs in them. Yeah, it's pretty accurate. Can you speak to that? Si. Preferably in English. Let's do it. What the are you guys talking about? I've always had, I guess you could call it a fascination with movies that have to do with the apocalypse. Either video games, movies, books, any form of media like that. I think it kind of started with I Am Legend when I was in high school. When I saw that movie in theaters, I was like, oh, that's like an interesting concept. And I'm sure I'd seen stuff before that, but 28 Days Later as well. I'm sure I'd seen stuff before those, but those two stick out in my head the most. And I kind of always wondered, when movies like this come out and I like want to go see them, or like I hear about stories that have to do with them, like The Last of Us or Horizon Zero Dawn, I was like, yeah, I gotta play those, or I gotta go see that. And another thing that I've noticed in a lot of these stories is there's always a dog or multiple dogs in the story, and I find that anthropologically fascinating, or ethnocynologically fascinating.
Hey, buddy. That's Buckley. Not much of a guard dog. But he's good to have around.
That's a good boy.
Once I went through school to be an anthropologist and grad school, and like having done all this research that I do now, and, you know, like consuming all of this modern media and video games and movies, political discourse, and just, you know, what's going on in the world, looking at it through an anthropological lens, I think I've kind of figured out why we're so drawn to these movies, or at least me specifically, and it probably goes for everybody. So I'm going to break this video down into two parts. The first part, I want to talk about just anthropology and the apocalypse, and why I think it's kind of we have a desire to return to our zoological selves. And then the second part, obviously, I would love to talk about dogs in apocalypse movies. So here we go. There's so many movies and TV shows and books and games that I could talk about, and I'd probably turn this into a series where I can talk about each one individually. I already have plans for 2. I'm just going to throw out some post-apocalyptic media just to kind of get you into the frame of where I'm thinking from. That would be I Am Legend, Fallout, The Last of Us, A Boy and His Dog, Finch is a new one, Station 11 is another, 28 Days Later, The Book of Eli, The Road, and of course Mad Max, all have to do with the apocalypse, and hopefully that gives you a frame of reference for what I'm talking about. And in this first section, I want to define a couple things. One being the apocalypse means the lifting of the veil. So you're pulling away the curtain on society. And in these movies, you really get a glimpse of humanity, or like humanity at their most human or humanity at their most barbaric, I think is kind of a theme of a lot of these movies. Another theme, too, that I'll explore here is to the monsters, we're the monsters. And in stories like The Walking Dead, which I forgot to mention already, and anything with a zombie apocalypse, especially like The Last of Us 2, it's not exactly the infected humans that are the problem, it's the other humans that are the problem, and they cause the most chaos in the plot or serve as the antagonist. It's other humans you have to worry about. And of course, something I've noticed in all of these movies is I can kind of put them into two categories. There's kind of the nuclear fallout apocalypse that we're kind of used to, which is the Cold War. There's a nuclear bomb, a nuclear holocaust, and that's like The Road and Mad Max and A Boy and His Dog. Fallout as well. But then there's other movies like I Am Legend, The Last of Us game and the show, and then a story like Station 11, all take place in what I would call an organic apocalypse. An apocalypse in which nature has kind of reclaimed the earth for itself, and like the disease of humans is gone. And I find that just to be a fascinating topic in itself. I'm just going to read this because I have it written out and I want to make sure I get all the points, but I had to put on my glasses, which hopefully I can still get prescriptions in the apocalypse. Humans, in the behaviorally modern sense, have existed for over 200,000 years, and we have a fascination with the past, but also a fascination with the future. And I can kind of divide this into Bigfoot and aliens. People ask me all the time, like, what do you think of Bigfoot and stuff? One, if there's a giant primate that exists out there in the wilderness, it would be in a huge group, screaming and yelling, throwing feces at each other, and also having sex really loud. So I don't think Bigfoot's real. And then there's aliens. But Bigfoot, and this is like to the monsters, we're the monsters kind of situation. Bigfoot is what we used to be. He's a big, hairy monster, or she, that roams the wilderness, and it's kind of spooky because it's something that we used to be in its form, but it's not an animal, and it's not human, but it's some giant, like, upright ape type thing, which is, you know, cryptid and creepy to us. But then there's aliens, which, like, the classic aliens, like the Greys, where they're huge-eyed and naked and gray. That's kind of how a chimpanzee looks at us, if you think of that. Like, we are hairless, have giant eyes, and do experiments on them. So humans are afraid of aliens in that sense. It's something that we haven't become yet, so we're scared of it. If they're flying here to our planet doing all these tests on us, they're clearly more scientifically advanced, and that's kind of frightening. So we fear what we are not, right? We fear being Bigfoot, but we also fear aliens because we are not them yet. I find that fascinating. Anyway, I digress and I'll continue. Apocalypse stories are often set in a bleak world telling bleak stories, yet they are fundamentally always human stories, using a bleak world to explore questions regarding philosophy, morality, and above all, what it means to be human. But of course, in these stories, the philosophical aspects of what it means to be human are often explored. Yet I think a reason we're so addicted to these stories is that we have a yearning to explore the lives of our past zoological selves. It's really hard to write a story about the Paleolithic. It's been done with, Planet of the Cave Bear, Alpha. Some new movie just came out recently I saw. Can't remember what it was called. It had to do with, like, Neanderthals and humans. I'll do a video on that. But 10,000 BC, solid example. Terrible movie. It's very hard to make a prehistoric movie with the set design, making the language right, making the plot good, all of that, without it being cheesy or, like, overboard. However, it's a lot easier to make a story set in, like, modern Boston after a plague, which is The Last of Us, or London in 28 Days Later, where people can speak modern English or whatever language the movie's in, and it's already based off of an environment we already know. I think apocalypse movies give us a way to look at tribalism and, like, de-evolution into our past selves in an environment that makes sense to us. It's not cheesy, but also believable. So in a sense, with post-apocalyptic stories, to put that into other words, we can explore life before civilization by exploring life after it. And I think that is an important factor here. And I think another reason, especially with, like, stories about the organic apocalypse, we really truly yearn to be back into our, like, past zoological selves. We want to be in nature. We hate the industrialization. Like, that's the whole point of Saruman in The Lord of the Rings. Like, industrialization is a plague upon the earth.
The trees are strong, my lord. Their roots go deep.
Rip them all down.
We love nature. We literally pay to go camping. Like, you have to pay to sleep outside, and which, you know, I'm happy to pay to sleep outside, especially if it goes towards wildlife management, and especially being in the Smokies a lot. You need those bear hooks that are there that the Forest Service puts there, the National Park Service, so it's good to pay. But just the absurdity of you have to pay to sleep outside sometimes. And we have stores like REI and, like, you know, sportsman stores and outdoor stores where you go and buy this stuff and you save up PTO to go fly out to some location to be outside. And at the same time, I find that really funny, but also really sad that we're, like, live in a civilization like that. But I understand, like, I have the modern amenities of civilization. I have, you know, vaccines, I have medicine, I have this camera that I'm talking to you on right now. So in stories like The Last of Us, I Am Legend, and Station 11, we explore stories in what I would call the organic apocalypse, as I said. A world reclaimed by nature, where the earth very much is alive, green, and returned to its natural state, rid of the disease of humans. But then in stories like The Road, or Mad Max, or A Boy and His Dog, or Fallout, the TV series, or the game series, whichever one you probably are more familiar with. I'm assuming more people are familiar with the TV show now. The Road, especially, is a deeply bleak story where Viggo Mortensen in the movie and his son, I can't remember, Cody Smith McPhee? There we go, got it. He's the kid in Alpha, actually, mentioned twice in this. Morality in a world with no morals. He's trying to teach his son that.
Sometimes I tell the boy old stories of courage and justice, difficult as they are to remember.
Trying to teach survival and trying to teach trust in a world where there's no trust. He's trying to avoid cannibalism because there's people that cannibalize people.
There's been cannibalism. Cannibalism is the great fear.
The complex roles of father and son, that filial relationship.
All I know is the child is my warrant. And if he is not the Word of God, then God never spoke.
And the power of memory and nostalgia is pretty prominent in the book, but also the power of hope. And these are all very human things that can apply to really any, like, movie in any time period, but that's very prominent in post-apocalyptic movies. But in stories like that, where there's a nuclear holocaust and The Road doesn't really even explain what happened, it's just everything's dead, there's no animals, you have to scavenge for food, there's nothing left.
The clock stopped at 1:17. There was a long sheer of bright light, then a series of low concussions. Each day is more gray than the one before. It is cold and growing colder as the world slowly dies. No animals have survived, and all the crops are long gone.
Mad Max 2, it's like this wasteland of a place, which I always find funny that in movies like Mad Max, the rest of the world could be totally fine, but that's just what Australia is dealing with at the moment, which is kind of funny. Whereas in 28 Days Later, they find out that Britain was just quarantined. The rest of the world seems to be okay, and they are, like, kind of bummed about that at the end.
Actually think about it. What would you do with a diseased little island? They quarantined us.
So again, the organic and the inorganic, and another example of an inorganic apocalypse story would be the Book of Eli, which I loved that movie. I haven't watched it, I think, more than twice, but it's very good. And in that story, Gary Oldman runs this, like, western town, like it looks like the Wild West, but a lot of refugees live there for water and food in a wasteland. And he wants to use the Bible to control people. And of course, Eli, which is Denzel Washington, I think, has a copy of the Bible, and he wants that from him. But he's trying to get the Bible to San Francisco where somebody can translate it or copy it and make a bunch more copies, because people need religion in such a bleak world like that.
I'll kill you. I'll take the book.
Why? Why do you want it?
I grew up with it. I know its power. And if you read it, then so do you. That's why they burned them all after the war.
Yeah, he wants to use the Bible to control people. So it's a very interesting story in the sense that this is pretty common in these movies. With the larger amount of population you have in these post-apocalyptic stories, the more control you need over the people. And that's where you get these antagonistic leaders. And I'm going all over the place, but let's say, for example, in The Walking Dead, that is a I think an organic apocalypse, like the world has reclaimed the earth, zombies have taken over, it's some kind of virus, right? It's natural. In that story, in the beginning of it, they're wandering and they're foraging, like actual hunter-gatherer foragers in the beginning, looking for food in different places, looking for safety. And then in the later seasons, or I think it's the second season, they find that prison and they start farming at the prison and they settle down into one spot, like being sedentary. This is an example of the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, where humans become sedentary. And when that happens, archaeologically, you see a lot more warfare. So lo and behold, in the story, the governor who runs this other town somewhere in Georgia wants to take their land or take their prison. Like, he doesn't like this other group. And that's exactly what happens when you like switch to a agricultural or a sedentary lifestyle. You're stuck in this one spot and all your population's there. And then when that runs out, you have to go take it from someone else. And that's like a very common thing in human history. And that's reflected in these movies too. So think of it as an example of the Paleolithic and the Neolithic. Another example of that happening would be 28 Days Later. It's a wandering band of 3 people that ends up becoming...
Mr. Bridges.
Where you been?
That's his daughter. They live 4 doors down.
Were you bitten? Oh. Did any of the blood get in your mouth? Mark?
Wait.
4 people at some point.
Do you have any clothes here?
Yes.
Then get them and get dressed. You have to leave now. More infected will be coming. They always do.
Where they then are trying to find this place and they hear a signal on the radio about a military base up in northern England or Scotland, I can't remember where there's a base and they can provide shelter for people. But of course, when they get there, the paramilitary group that's there has a lot of twisted ways of like how they want to run civilization, and there's a leader and there's a hierarchy, and it becomes like there's a lot of sexism there with the 2 women that are protagonists in the story. But the point being, the guy's kind of a dick.
There is no infection, it's just people killing people. He's insane!
Tell him to go.
And it's like when you have this sedentary place that's well defended and well stocked with food, it leads to more violence. And in a lot of these stories where it's just one person, like I Am Legend, let's go back to an organic apocalypse. He's literally collecting and foraging. And I keep digressing. Archaeologically and anthropologically, we have collectors and foragers. Foragers are your classic, they move from resource to resource, collecting resources. And let's say the berry patch or the berry tree they're picking from are dwindling, and the deer in the area have been hunted enough where the population's kind of falling. So they leave that area and move to another so that that area can regrow. They can come back next year or never. And they go to the next patch and they set up camp there. And sometimes they'll have a little camp equidistant between these areas, but that's where you get into collectors who have 2 seasonal camps. They have a winter and a summer camp, and this is a common thing you see in the archaeological record, where they have these main camps, but they'll set up smaller camps in resource areas where they go collect resources and bring them back to the main camps. And I believe in Alpha, that prehistoric movie, you get a glimpse of that. There's a main camp that go on a hunt elsewhere, and then they're going to bring that stuff back. But foragers are your classic going around foraging for stuff. And we could let The Last of Us, Joel is kind of that when he's out on the road.
Just jump right back into it and keep looking for supplies, which is basically this game. I think if the name had been changed from The Last of Us to Supply Searching Simulator, it probably would have gone just as well. Hey, there's the bridge.
Fuck yeah.
In I Am Legend, for sure, you can see him literally being a collector in the sense that he is systematically looking at patches in New York City of area, like has a map where he's crossing off which buildings are clear from the Crippen virus, which was a virus that was caused by someone trying to make a cure for cancer, and it mutated and people turned into these like vampiric zombie-like things that can't go in the sun. So at night they all come out and he has to hide in his place with the really nice house in Washington Square Park, which you can go see. Digressing. He goes from building to building with the dog and kicks open the door, and the dog runs in and barks and lets him know it's clear. And then he picks cans and stuff out of the shelves and sees what's left for food to bring back to his residential area, which is in Washington Square. And he's literally collecting and foraging, and that's something humans do. We're returning to our zoological selves in which we have to scavenge for food and survive. And to wrap these two together, in the nuclear apocalypse and the organic apocalypse, it is still people dealing with their environment. And all of human history, all of human archaeology and human paleoanthropology and human evolution, and just evolution in general, is how an organism responds and adapts to its environment. And in these stories, humans are responding and adapting to a hostile environment that is either organic or inorganic, but also hostile humans that are there. So I keep saying, returning to our past zoological selves, it's like, this is how humans operate. And then to the layman who's not an archaeologist or anthropologist watching this stuff, you might just be like, oh wow, like civilization has dwindled, people are becoming, savages or barbaric or something like that. Or I don't know what word you'd use. Like, civilization's fallen and there's no rules, but like, really, there are scientific rules that humans have to follow. We need food to create energy to reproduce, and that's just what keeps people going. And in 28 Days Later, they're trying to find refuge. In I Am Legend, he's trying to find a cure. The last man on Earth happens to be a virologist that can create the cure. I always found that funny. But great movie, and the book is very different, but the movie's great. And before I get to dogs, there's one last thing I want to talk about. The human aspect of these stories, where you're exploring the human condition, and everybody is in a way kind of grappling with the idea of what it means to be human. Like, do I submit to savagery, or do I keep my morals and not eat people? Do I not become violent? These are things in these stories that, especially in like complex stories like The Walking Dead, where there's multiple seasons, you do get kind of into the head of the bad people, and then you start to feel more sympathetic for them, and yada yada. I Am Legend, he's trying to create the cure, and I'll get to that with dogs. It's more important with the dogs. That's about humanity. 28 Days Later. The Last of Us, let me use this as an example. If you're not familiar with the game or the show is fantastic, and actually, like, one of the rare occasions where an adaptation was better than the actual source material to me. Obviously, there's more zombies in the game, and like, it's more entertaining, but the show like took the story and like made it better, I think. And The Last of Us is a story in which, it's an organic apocalypse, and this is an interesting one where a fungus takes over the world, not zombies, not rabies, not cancer, or COVID or something like that. It is
fungus.
Oh.
Dr. Schoenheiss, you're in distress.
Fungal infection of this kind is real, but not in humans.
True, fungi cannot survive if its host's internal temperature is over 94 degrees. And currently there are no reasons for fungi to evolve to be able to withstand higher temperatures. But what if that were to change? What if, for instance, the world were to get slightly warmer? Well, now there is reason to evolve.
And it's the cordyceps fungus. I forget exactly what kind it is, but it's a real one that attacks insects in Southeast Asia in specific areas. You can see this on planet Earth, I believe, where a fungus grows inside the body and eventually bursts out the top of the ant's head, and it controls the ant's muscle system. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't control their brain. Their brain is still there and has its own thoughts, but their muscle system is taken over by the fungi, and it makes the ant crawl up a stalk of plant, grip down on the top leaf so it doesn't blow away in the wind. And once the ant is high up above the ground, this little flagella tentacle antenna thing, which a fungus tentacle, comes out of the ant's head and then blows spores across the landscape to repopulate. And again, it needs a host body, so it needs food to make energy to reproduce. That's just how organisms exist. Fungi scare the shit out of me because they're not animals and they're not plants. They're in their own kingdom. I don't like fungi. They scare me. I don't really eat a lot of mushrooms. If they're given to me, I'll eat them, but I don't seek them out.
One of them could become capable of burrowing into our brains and taking control, not of millions of us, but billions of us. Billions of puppets with poisoned minds, permanently fixed on one unifying goal: to spread the infection to every last human alive by any means necessary.
So if that happens...
We lose.
But The Last of Us, in terms of the human story, Joel and his girlfriend live in a quarantine zone, which is run by something called FEDRA, which is the Federal Emergency Disaster Relief Agency, which has kind of taken over, essentially FEMA, has taken over in a fascist dictatorship where they have these different quarantine zones. And what's interesting about the story is like FEDRA has kept these people safe for 20 years after the pandemic broke out. And it's a brutal authoritarian like regime in a sense, but the people that live inside the walls are fed, they're kept safe from the zombies outside. But there's also a resistance movement called the Fireflies, which goes into the plot where this girl who is apparently immune, she's been bitten, but it hasn't affected her. Joel and his girlfriend have to then smuggle her across the country to a Firefly base where they can work on a cure using her DNA and her, blood. And Joel lost his daughter in the beginning of the game and in the first episode of the show, and he's like a jaded, like the first episode, he like has no issues like cremating a kid when other people can't, burn a kid. He fucking eats these pills and then chases it with whiskey. He's just like done with life. And he doesn't want to deal with this girl because he doesn't want attachment to people because he misses his daughter and he's like got trauma from that. But of course he has to take her across the country and you run into different people. Like in the game, it's in, I want to say Pittsburgh, and the show it's Kansas City, is overrun not by FEDRA, but this group that overthrew FEDRA, and it's like its own autonomous paramilitary group that runs the city. But, they're trying to dodge these people and they have to navigate relationships with these people. Like, are they dangerous? Or are they not? Are they going to help us? And they eventually get across the country. And as it goes, Joel reunites with his long lost brother for like several years. He hadn't heard from him, ends up in Wyoming, and he's growing to care and have affection for this girl. And the story is kind of about finding people. He lost his daughter and he loses his girlfriend early on. Spoiler alert, sorry, it's been out for years now. And it's like about love and finding people. I find that good. And the humans are the virus, not exactly the fungus. And lastly, another story that I think really kind of encapsulates the human story of in a unique, non-violent way is Station 11. And I had never heard of this. Apparently it's a book, but I watched the show on HBO and it was fantastic. And it's really interesting. It was written about a COVID pandemic that wipes out 90% of the population, but they started filming it while COVID broke out. So these people were filming a movie or show about that while experiencing it. So that kind of makes it unique in a sense.
Hey, excuse me? Is this because of that thing? Should I go somewhere?
You should go home.
But it's about all these intertwined characters after the pandemic breaks out. And what's quirky about it is it's not like a violent zombie story or like a violent paramilitary story like Fallout can be. It's literally about this group of traveling like minstrels, theater kids that actors that drive or like have like a caravan of like old cars and wagons, and they have a horse that like moves it and stuff, and move from town to town around the Great Lakes, providing Shakespearean plays and music for people, which sounds so like goofy, but it's really touching. And what's cool about this story too is the remaining people that live in this area have their own little communities that have been built to protect themselves from the virus, but protect themselves from other people. And they have their own unique culture. There's a group of people at the airport who have, barricaded off the airport because it's a nice place that you can seal all the doors. And they have their own community where there's a school and a hospital, and they start building a museum. It's really interesting. And it's about all these intertwining characters, but what's really compelling about the story is kind of like the Book of Eli. It's called Station 11 because Station 11 was a graphic novel given to two characters before the pandemic that didn't know each other. They both have used Station 11 to get through trauma of the pandemic.
As he told Alex in episode 4, he believes those born after the pandemic are special.
The first human generation to be rid from trauma. The survivors were the only liars left.
And one guy ends up using it kind of like in the Book of Eli as a a Bible or like a manifesto and has this cult of children that want to live in the before times and stuff like that. And the other girl who's the protagonist and that guy's the antagonist both know the story. It's very interesting. I don't want to spoil too much of it if you haven't seen it or heard of it. Fantastic story, but to boil it down, it's about the human condition. And what's really unique about this is the need for art. Survival is insufficient. That's like a quote from the show. Survival is insufficient. It is art that you need. It is like people. It's joy and love that you need to get you through the apocalypse. Beautiful story. I can't recommend it enough. I will make a video about that one.
But I have that within, which passeth show. These but the trappings and the suits of woe.
Moving on to part 2, we're going to talk about dogs, ethnocynology in the apocalypse. A Boy and His Dog, let's start with that. That's the original one I can think of that has a dog in it. There might be one earlier than that. It's a movie that was a novella first.
A Boy and His Dog, a film that has become a cult legend.
And it's a very problematic movie when you watch it now, but it's a apocalyptic wasteland after World War III that broke out, I think, in like 2002 or something. And it was filmed in the 60s or 70s. And it's very misogynistic. And like, I hate when that word's like thrown around when it's like not misogynistic, but this movie is like...
Right now I'm hungry and I want to get laid.
That's what you always say.
You go find a chick and I'll hustle us up some food.
I can't do good work when I'm hungry.
You ain't pulling that crap on me again. And you can shove that part about how you lost the ability to hunt for food when you learned how to talk.
No food, no female.
When you watch it. But essentially, this kid can telepathically communicate with his dog. And in exchange for finding the dog food, because you can't open cans, he helps the kid find women and sniffs them out. Which is, you know, probably in the 70s, it was like, haha, and like now it's like a little weird.
That stupid broad.
You're so funny when you're sexually frustrated.
Damn it.
And then when I say that, like I'm underselling how weird that is.
Women can't get pregnant. Every once in a while we need new blood.
Horse manure. You mean you want me to knock up your broad?
And then, but what's interesting is there's an underground community in that's like a weird 50s utopia, but obviously a dystopia that lives underground. And that's exactly what Fallout was inspired by. There's a Fallout shelter that's in this weird atomic punk, I guess is what you call it. Not steampunk, but atomic punk civilization culture thing. And there's a dog in it. And it's about morality, but also like, I can't even get it. Just, it's an interesting movie, but thinking off the top of my head, I can't remember like what the moral of the story was, but it's just like the kid chooses the dog at the end of it.
Try to get back as quick as I can. Will you wait?
For a while. Then over the hill. I'll miss you, Pig. I'll really miss you.
L.Q. Jones, A Boy and His Dog. A film that has become a legend by word of mouth. Rated R.
And another story, of course, I Am Legend, that talked about how he's the last man on Earth trying to find a cure, and he has a dog. And what's interesting in I Am Legend is the dog serves as a way in the plot for him to talk and communicate with the audience, because if he's the last man on Earth, he's got no one to talk to, and it would just be him talking out loud, which is a little odd, or, you know, he's narrating his thoughts over, you know, just the footage, which would be a little odd. You know, it's been done before. And Matt Damon in The Martian talks to a video vlog every day when he's talking to himself. But there's other people in that movie, like back on Earth, that are talking. So, digressing.
What am I supposed to say? Hello. Want to see some infected rats? Okay, tomorrow. I'm gonna say hello tomorrow.
In the story, the dog serves as someone he can talk to, and we understand how we talk to dogs, and like they can't respond really in English, but they can respond with yelps, whines, licks, kisses, wagging their tails, barking, you know. And we start to love this dog as a character, and it has agency. It does stupid stuff. And he's like, oh God, I gotta go find my dog that ran into this infected building full of zombies. But we grow attached to the dog, and this story is 20 years old now, so I'm going to spoil it. The dog is immune to the airborne strain of the virus, like he is, but the dog is not immune to the virus if she's bitten. And she ends up being bitten by other zombie-infected dogs, and... Earlier in the movie, you see like a sign that says like warning infected dogs come out at night, like before the pandemic really broke out. And that's like a foreshadowing, I guess, but also interesting that ethnocynology, dogs exist where people do. And of course the dogs would then be infected by this virus too. But of course he spends the whole movie like desperately and like heroically searching for a cure. And he gets so frustrated when he can't do it or when an experiment fails, but he still has his dog. But only once he loses his dog and he has to like literally kill his own dog and like put it out of its misery when it gets bitten before it turns. And it's like one of the saddest moments in like history I've ever seen on TV. It was brutal. I was in high school and like with all my friends and we were like, oh man. A lot of Bob Marley theme in the movie too. It's just an awesome movie. But it's only when he loses his dog that he loses his humanity. And he tries to kill himself. And of course, like a Deus Ex Machina, random people show up, 2 people that had heard his message that he sent out every day, waiting to come find him at a specific location that he'd been broadcasting where he would be, and he can give them shelter. So the day his dog dies and he tries to kill himself, he then finds these people, and then the stories about, you know, religion and God in a sense too, but humanity. And another story... I didn't play Fallout. I saw the show, but I'd watched friends play Fallout. I'm familiar with it. I started playing New Vegas and Fallout 4, but I never like fully played it. There's a dog in it, and it's called Dog Meat. And like it's a companion you can use, and like you can pet the dog and stuff, and that's, you know, part of Fallout. That's a homage to A Boy and His Dog. Another story with a dog in the movie, The Road has a dog in it, and I'm going to make a video on that later. I won't spoil that one because it's going to be the whole video, but the dog is important in the end. Another story with a dog that I found, the 2 of them. One is Black Mirror. There's an episode called Metalhead, and it's all black and white. It's post-apocalyptic, and I was like, let's go when I saw this. And it's about the Boston Dynamics dogs, or like a version of that in the future that I guess were made as soldiers or robots or everyday companion things. It seems to be like, you know, warfare, where they have killed everyone on the planet, and people like live in fear of waking up these dogs that are sleeping because they think all the humans are dead, and like the random humans that wake them up will get killed by them. You know, I'll make a video on this one, but there's a scene where like the dog chases a human so far that she has to climb up a tree, and it's like one of these weird juxtapositions of like the dog inherits the earth now and the humans are stuck back up in the trees like primates. And I liked that symbolism. And of course, at the end of the thing, like rather than be killed by a dog, takes her own life kind of thing. But it's scary. The dog does not stop chasing. And what's important about this is wolves and dogs and humans are all persistence hunters. We keep running and running and running till we run our prey to the ground. And that's why this story was creepy, because the dog just keeps going and going and going. It's a robot. It doesn't run out. It doesn't have to stop to pant. It doesn't have to breathe. It's interesting and it's scary in that sense. But lastly, one I want to talk about that I hadn't seen before until like a year or 2 ago is called Finch. And it's Tom Hanks. It's on Apple TV Plus. And the back of the DVD that you could read is like, you know, there's a nuclear thing. The ozone's all messed up. Tom Hanks lives in this warehouse. He's an engineer and he's building a robot and he has a dog. It's not too hard to put it together as the movie goes on that he's dying of radiation sickness, but he's building this robot to take care of his dog for him when he dies.
Now, if you can speak, tell me something about you.
Robots must protect dog.
And the whole movie is them trying to get to, I believe, San Francisco, while he's training this robot to be human. And not only be human, but to take care of a dog. which is, if you see my lecture, like see my videos, like how strange it is, the human and dog relationship, how strange ethnocynology is. Like, if an alien were to come here, like, why are these animals so close with humans and stuff? He's training the robot not only to be a human, like trying to teach it metaphor, trying to teach it to walk, trying to teach it like rules to live by, like, you don't go off alone, you don't go outside, you don't do anything stupid, kind of like stuff like that without my permission. Learning that, like kind of teaching somebody, like my brother has severe autism, and it reminded me of that. Like, and that's also part of the road that I found interesting too, is like you could kind of understand the kid as being autistic, not understanding a lot of social rules. And it was interesting, Tom Hanks programming this robot to do this, and how he's not only learning to be human, but learning to take care of a dog, and how the dog has to learn to trust the robot because it's not human. It doesn't have that chemical bond with it, but it does understand that the robot was something that Tom Hanks made. It ends very sad, I'll give you that. Most apocalyptic movies with dogs do end that way. So I can go on forever and ever about this. I'm going too long now, but I think we love apocalyptic movies because it's a way to view ourselves in our hunter-gatherer form, or like what we used to be, and not in our current place where we have civilization and Wi-Fi and Netflix and YouTube and society and government. It's a way to view ourselves in that ancient sense, but in the future. And like as civilization breaks down, I find that fascinating. I love the zoological aspect of it, how humans have to forage, the group dynamics of that, and they have to follow foraging theory. There's a book I'll put here called The Life Ways of Hunter-Gatherers, written by my professor, who was my first guest on the David Ian Howe show. I'll put that here too. I'll put that in the description. You can scientifically study how hunter-gatherers and humans operate, and it's fascinating. And having known all that and taking classes on this, when you watch these movies, you're like, oh, that's interesting, like how humans, behave. And archaeology is just understanding human behavior through time. So I love the archaeology of the apocalypse in that sense because it's understanding human behavior in the future. Yeah, exploring themes of humanity, what it means to be human, exploring morality, and then most importantly, I think why dogs are so prominent in these stories is that dogs existed before civilization, and they will exist long after it. They're just such integral parts of human society that I don't really think when these authors or these writers make these stories, they're like, will dogs be around? It's just not even really a thought. It's just like, yeah, there's a dog. I don't know, but that seems to be the case. Yeah, but it's like even in the apocalypse, man's best friend will be there, and it adds to the gravity of the story because it's someone that you need to care for. It's a family member. It can't speak. It can't fend for itself in a lot of ways, and humans have to take care of it. And it shows that this will play in with the road. It shows that people are good, that if they have a dog, that they're not bad. And of course, calling back to my lecture, it seems in a lot of indigenous mythologies and old world mythologies too, dogs are judgment of character, especially when you die and in the afterlife. So with the whole third section of my book is dogs in the afterlife. Dogs in the apocalypse makes sense in that way, right? So if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. There'll be a series on this. I have the David Ian Howe Show, which is my podcast where I interview people that I find interesting, usually archaeologically and talking about dogs. And then other content creators, but also Ethnocynology is my main science content that I put out, which is also available in podcast form on the Archaeology Podcast Network. So just type in Ethnocynology with David Ian Howe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all of them. And, if you love the human and dog relationship and you love my logo, by the way, that logo is a dog and a human handprint at the same time, if you couldn't figure that. Some people don't realize that. I have shirts, sweaters, pants, shorts, stickers, hats on my website where you can buy that. So if you support the human and dog relationship in the past, the present, or want to support it in the future, go ahead and get something from my website, davidianhowe.com/store. And I promise the first video I will do in the series of Anthropology and the Apocalypse will be I Am Legend, because that's the first one I would immediately think to do. I think most people have seen it. Great movie, and I'll do an in-depth review and talk about the dog and try to contact some of the writers of the movie too and see if we can get them on and talk about it. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the video if it's out and the world hasn't ended.
Sud för ein graden mig kan singa
I say you look